Hello and welcome to Artificial Fluency. I'm your host, John, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Emma. Today, we're diving into a topic many of our listeners have been requesting: how to learn English fast.
That's right, John. In our busy world, many learners are looking for effective ways to accelerate their English acquisition. Today, we'll share evidence-based strategies that can help you make rapid progress without cutting corners on quality.
I love this topic because there's so much misconception out there. Many companies promise fluency in 30 days, which just isn't realistic. But there are genuine ways to optimize your learning process for faster results.
Before we get into specific strategies, let's address what fast really means in language learning, because expectations matter.
Great starting point. Learning any language is a significant undertaking, and English, with its notoriously inconsistent spelling and vast vocabulary, presents unique challenges. Even with the most efficient methods, achieving genuine fluency takes consistent effort over time.
Exactly. When we talk about learning English fast, we're really talking about optimizing your learning process to make the most efficient progress possible. Think of it as taking the express train rather than the local. You'll still need to travel the distance, but you'll make fewer unnecessary stops.
That's a helpful metaphor. So let's break down what makes learning efficient versus inefficient. Many learners waste time with approaches that feel productive, but don't yield proportional results.
Another key point is that fast looks different depending on your starting point and goals. A beginner aiming for basic conversational ability has a different journey than an intermediate learner preparing for an academic exam.
And let's not forget that consistency beats intensity. Studying English for 30 minutes daily will generally yield better results than cramming for 5 hours once a week, even though the total hours are fewer.
Absolutely. With those foundations in mind, let's talk about the core principles of accelerated language learning, starting with what research tells us about optimizing the process.
The first principle is high-frequency, comprehensible input. Research consistently shows that extensive exposure to language you can mostly understand is crucial for rapid acquisition.
That's why immersion is so powerful. When you're constantly surrounded by English that's just slightly above your level, what linguists call I+1, your brain naturally begins to extract patterns and meaning.
Digital tools have made this easier than ever. Podcasts like ours, YouTube videos, streaming services, and language learning apps can create a portable immersion environment, even if you don't live in an English-speaking country.
The second principle is spaced repetition. Our brains are designed to forget information that doesn't seem important, so reviewing materials at strategic intervals is crucial for retention.
Exactly. Modern spaced repetition systems, SRS, like Anki, or the algorithms built into apps like Memrise, optimize this process, presenting vocabulary just as you're about to forget it. This is far more efficient than random reviewing. And
the third principle is focusing on the most useful content first. The 80-20 rule, or Pareto principle, applies strongly to language learning. Roughly 20% of your efforts will yield 80% of your results if you focus on high-frequency vocabulary and patterns.
That's why starting with the 1,000 most common English words is so effective. These words make up about 75% of everyday English usage. Add the next 1,000 most frequent words, and you'll understand around 85% of common text.
The fourth principle is active recall. Passive exposure helps, but actively retrieving information from memory strengthens those neural pathways much more effectively.
And finally, there's the principle of meaningful usage. We learn and retain language better when we're using it for genuine communication rather than just studying it as an abstract system.
Now let's translate these principles into practical strategies, starting with optimizing your daily learning routine.
First, I'd recommend creating an English bubble. Surrounding yourself with the language as much as possible. Change your phone, social media, and device settings to English. Listen to English music, podcasts, and audiobooks during commutes or chores.
The key is making English a part of your daily life, rather than just something you study occasionally. This creates constant, low-pressure exposure that accumulates rapidly.
Next, implement a minimum viable study session. Even 10 to 15 minutes of focused study is valuable if you can't do more. Consistency matters more than duration. A daily 15-minute vocabulary review using spaced repetition is more effective than an occasional 2-hour cram session.
I love the concept of habit stacking for this. Attach your English practice to existing habits. Perhaps you review vocabulary while having your morning coffee, or listen to an English podcast during your commute.
When it comes to vocabulary acquisition, focusing on frequency lists is a game changer for rapid progress. Start with the 500 most common words, then expand to 1,000 and so on. Tools like word and phrase info or the Oxford 3000 can help identify these high-value targets.
And don't just memorize word lists. Instead, learn words in context through example sentences, or better yet, in phrases and collocations, words that naturally appear together. This builds not just vocabulary, but natural usage patterns.
For grammar, I recommend a just-in-time approach rather than a just-in-case approach. Learn grammatical structures as you need them for communication, focusing on patterns rather than memorizing rules.
Pattern recognition is indeed crucial. Look for formulaic sequences, those chunks of language that native speakers use as units, like, I'm looking forward to, or, would you mind if I? Learning these as chunks accelerates both comprehension and production.
Let's talk about reading strategies for rapid acquisition. Extensive reading of simpler materials is generally more effective than intensive reading of challenging texts. Graded readers are excellent for this purpose.
The narrow reading approach is particularly effective, reading multiple texts on the same topic. This naturally recycles vocabulary in different contexts, reinforcing acquisition without the frustration of constantly encountering completely new words.
For listening comprehension, podcasts designed for learners are excellent because you can often control the playback speed. Start slower, then gradually increase to natural speed as your ear adjusts.
The listen, read, listen technique can rapidly boost comprehension too. First, listen to a passage, then read the transcript to clarify what you heard. Finally, listen again with your new understanding. This creates a powerful learning loop.
Speaking practice often presents a bottleneck for rapid progress because it requires partners or classes. How can learners address this?
Language exchange platforms like Tandem or HelloTalk offer flexible practice opportunities. Just 15 to 30 minutes of conversation practice a few times weekly can dramatically accelerate your speaking development.
For those feeling shy, the shadowing technique bridges the gap between listening and speaking. You repeat along with audio, matching pronunciation and intonation. It's a form of private speaking practice that builds muscle memory and confidence.
Another approach is recording yourself speaking, then comparing with native models. This self-feedback loop develops awareness of your patterns and progress.
Writing often gets neglected in discussions of fast learning, but it's actually a powerful tool for consolidation because it's inherently slower and more deliberate than speaking.
Keeping a daily English journal, even just a few sentences, provides regular production practice and creates a record of your progress. Writing forces you to retrieve vocabulary and apply grammar rules, strengthening those neural pathways.
For those seeking feedback, platforms like Lang 8 or writing exchanges on Reddit can connect you with native speakers who will review your writing.
Let's address some common obstacles to rapid progress and how to overcome them.
The first is the intermediate plateau, that frustrating period where progress seems to stall despite continued effort. This happens partly because the initial gains from learning high-frequency words and basic grammar are behind you.
To break through this plateau, diversify your input sources and increase complexity gradually. Also, start specializing in content relevant to your specific goals, whether that's business English, academic writing, or casual conversation.
Another common obstacle is limited practice time. For busy learners, the key is maximizing efficiency rather than trying to find more hours in the day.
Microlearning is effective here. 5-minute vocabulary reviews while waiting in line, listening practice during commutes, language learning apps during breaks. These small sessions add up surprisingly quickly when they're consistent.
Perfectionism can also slow progress. Many learners hesitate to speak or write until they feel ready, but this delays the very practice that builds proficiency.
Adopt what polyglots call the day one principle. Start using the language from day one, even with just a few words. Embrace errors as part of the learning process, rather than signs of failure.
Motivation issues often arise when progress seems slow. How can learners maintain the motivation needed for consistent practice?
Setting concrete, achievable milestones helps, perhaps understanding a YouTube video without subtitles or having a 5-minute conversation. These visible wins fuel continued effort.
Tracking progress explicitly also helps. Whether through language apps that show your growing vocabulary, recording speaking samples monthly to hear your improvement, or keeping a learning journal, seeing your progress maintains motivation.
Finding community is another powerful motivator. Whether online or in person, connecting with fellow English learners provides accountability, shared resources, and emotional support.
Let's talk about leveraging technology for accelerated learning, because digital tools can significantly streamline the process.
Spaced repetition apps like Anki or Memrise optimize vocabulary review, ensuring you focus on words you're most likely to forget.
AI-powered language partners like ChatGPT or language-specific AI companions can provide unlimited conversation practice, explanations, and corrections. While they don't replace human interaction, they remove the scheduling and availability barriers.
Text-to-speech and speech recognition technologies allow for pronunciation practice with immediate feedback, even without a human teacher present.
Language learning analytics tools can identify patterns in your errors, helping you focus remediation efforts where they'll have the greatest impact.
Let's wrap up with a 30-day acceleration plan for listeners who want to jumpstart their English learning.
Week 1 focuses on building your daily learning habit and English environment. Change device settings to English, install key apps, and establish a minimum 15-minute daily study routine focused on high-frequency vocabulary.
Week 2 introduces active production. Begin daily writing of at least 3 to 5 sentences, start shadowing practice with short audio clips, and schedule your first language exchange or tutor session.
Week 3 expands your input sources to include native content. Begin with short YouTube videos on familiar topics. Use the listen, read, listen technique with podcasts, and start a narrow reading project on a topic that interests you.
Week 4 focuses on consolidation and assessment. Review your progress, identify gaps, adjust your learning system based on what's working, and set specific goals for the coming months.
Throughout this process, remember that fast doesn't mean instant. The goal is steady, efficient progress without wasted effort, not unrealistic overnight transformations.
Let's summarize the key takeaways for our listeners who want to accelerate their English learning.
First, create an immersive English environment. Even if you don't live in an English-speaking country, digital tools make this more possible than ever.
Second, prioritize high-frequency vocabulary and patterns using spaced repetition systems to optimize retention.
Third, balance input, reading, listening, with output, speaking, writing daily, even if just for a few minutes.
Fourth, embrace good enough in your production. Waiting until you feel ready only delays progress.
And finally, be consistent but patient. Language acquisition is a cumulative process. Small daily efforts compound into remarkable progress over time.
That brings us to the end of today's episode on how to learn English fast. We hope these strategies help you optimize your learning journey for maximum efficiency without sacrificing quality.
Thank you for listening to Artificial Fluency. If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe to our podcast and share it with friends who might benefit. Until next time,
Happy learning, everyone.